Excellent. So our next panel, we have some true pioneers in the Canadian cannabis industry. I'm not going to get into introductions because we could spend a long time introducing these fine ladies and gentlemen, but we'll get right to it. So the topic of our panel is Canada really at the forefront of the cannabis industry? And we're really going to discuss sort of where is Canada at and where do we actually need to go from a leadership perspective in the industry. Are we at the front? Are we behind? Are we going to fall behind? And I think it's particularly important from a Maltese and a European perspective because the world is very much looking today to Canada from a cannabis policy and a regulatory perspective, but also from a sort of a legalization perspective. And we'll talk a little bit about the rollout and how it's been and where there's some opportunities and challenges. So without further ado, I'll get us started with Barinder. Let's talk about, why did the government get into this? Where are we at? And what do you think we've done well from a government perspective, and where do you think there can be some changes?
Thanks, Deepak, and good to be here. I think we got to remember that the Canadian policy around cannabis was brought in by Supreme Courts. Then we had a politician who was leader of the third party, made a policy announcement on a whim. Recreational came in, and that was brought in. But reluctantly, the government still hasn't championed cannabis in Canada or abroad. And we see many Canadian companies, many Canadians travel around the world, and that also extends to our international offices, our trade commissioners, our high commissioners, our ambassadors. You don't see them attending these conferences, so they truly haven't championed the industry yet per se, and I think that's something that we definitely need to improve on. One area I feel where the government has got it right is setting the regulations pretty high for production. I don't think Canada's the model to follow for patient access. It's been a bit of a struggle to get there, but in terms of commercializing the industry, setting high standards, regulation, Health Canada is a very respected regulator around the world, so in that aspect, I think they've done a pretty good job.
Jeanette, do you want to talk about some challenges and some opportunities? First of all, I'd like to hear your thoughts. Do you think we're a leader in the cannabis industry on a global basis?
I think that Canada has a unique opportunity to be a leader. We started out well. I've been in the cannabis industry since 2011 when I started my first company, so I'm kind of a pioneer in this. We have good, strict regulation on cultivation and product control, which is great, and I think that can be a benchmark for other countries to follow. I completely agree with Barinder that we haven't given the best patient access. I came from a medical background, and I think that patient access is critical, and I think we have a lot of work to do yet in Canada to have reasonable, safe access for patients. Some of the biggest opportunities, though, are certainly we have had a number of years of experience in building out best-in-class companies and have learned from our own mistakes, and there's been a lot. But now I think we're really starting to dial it in and figure out how to do it well, how to cultivate well, develop products well, and hopefully our biggest challenge right now is working with our federal, municipal, and provincial regulators on the distribution models for patients and in our adult use recreational market.
Joel, you look at this from a different perspective because you're in sort of the ancillary business and certainly in picks and shovels, many people have said. What's your perspective on where Canada is and how we've dealt with this?
I think Canada's definitely done some things very well and made some very interesting mistakes. But, I think even if you look at the U.S. market, which couldn't be more different than the medical market in the EU, there's still great lessons to be learned of, the production bottlenecks, the challenges that they've faced. I mean, those will be the same challenges here, but with a much higher regulation, right? I mean, the extraction of cannabis, which we're specialists in, we make the equipment that powers a lot of the companies in the space, but extracting from cannabis versus extracting lavender or nutraceuticals or pharmaceuticals like with a single volatile is so very different. So the Canadians are just getting into our product market now, so access has been a big problem on a lot of those products that patients are actually looking for. But the formulations and the pharmaceutical experience that's coming from the European markets meshed with the Canadian expertise is going to be a very powerful combo if it's done right.
Yeah. Now you have a unique lens into the industry because you look at it from a sales perspective and you really know where the industry is going. Post legalization in Canada and post a number of licensing, have you seen sort of, an increase in sales in terms of number of machines? Have you seen a decrease? Are you seeing a certain pattern evolve maybe on a global basis where you're like, you were getting a lot of requests from Canada. Are you still getting those requests? Have they picked up in a certain area of the world geographically? What are you seeing?
We're very unique where, when our clients are going into a market, we already have to be there. We have to understand the regulations. For us, we're making equipment which, needs UL, needs CE markings, needs to be certified for pressure, needs to be GMP ready. I mean, it's the equipment component of a GMP facility is a very important one, but it's only one piece of the entire GMP puzzle. So, we need to know where all of the steel came from. We need to have material traceability, sensors, data collection. I mean, so when somebody comes into a market, we have to be prepped for that. So there's a lot of educating, and we spend a lot of time in Europe now. But, the majority of our sales are still in North and South America. But, this is going to be a very exciting market as it builds out.
Excellent. Michael, do you want to talk a little bit about sort of, the European opportunity? And obviously, we at Material Ventures are doing a few things. Do you want to chat a little bit about where you see Europe from an opportunity perspective?
Yeah, for sure. And thanks, Deepak. And excited to be here. It's, Europe, it's really exciting to be in Malta a year later and understanding how the landscape's evolving. It's really, as Joel mentioned, ripe for opportunity and really in the first or second inning of medical cannabis. In terms of how I think Canada will impact the European rollout, we've seen a ton of cultivation coming online in Canada and a movement towards like value-add products, Cannabis 2.0 products, and seeing how those brands in Canada and how products in Canada are going to evolve on a global basis. It will be really interesting to see as the opportunity, especially with Materia, rolls out and just European medical cannabis. We really only have meaningful sales in Germany right now, but every week, every month, we're seeing new markets open up. We're seeing opportunities for probably the highest margin sales globally. And really, it's about a lot of the things that some of the speakers have spoken about today. How can we improve access? How can we improve education? Because it's so exciting what's happening here.
Yeah, awesome. John, I want to switch over to you. You obviously pioneered by starting on the cultivation side and are now progressing onto, on the one side, brands, and on the other side, manufacturing. Can you speak to sort of why you made that transition and shift or pivot from the cultivation over into the brands and sort of the distribution side?
Sure. I mean, I think at the end of the day, brands are what's going to win the day in Canada. I sort of read the regulations and was reading the tea leaves when they started, giving out a lot of cultivation licenses. I really thought the focus was going to turn to more value-added products, which is why we decided to apply for a standard processing license, which gives us the ability to do anything except cultivate. But I really think at the end of the day, that's where the market's going to be going, and there's going to be constant pressure, as we've seen in Canada, on the production side. So really, the next wave is going to be those value-added products.
Right. I just want to see if anyone has a question from the audience. I mean, I've got a whole bunch of questions, obviously, and I could keep these people on stage all day. But if we've got a question that you have about the European industry, about the Canadian industry, I'd love to see you put your hand up and sort of ask a question so we can focus the conversation in that direction. If you don't, I'll continue sort of down the same path that I'm on. Do we have a question? Yeah, Antonio, go ahead.
So we've seen a lot of hard times lately for the Canadian industry, in particular for publicly listed companies. Can you explain to the audience what were the reasons for that change in the tendency in Canadian companies?
Yeah. Let's start with you. Go down. Yeah.
Go for it.
I agree. It's been a big challenge. And I think there was a lot of momentum, and really it was a promotional and forward-looking industry for sure. And I've been involved in several companies. My current company, Believe, has been truly affected by the downfall in the stock market as a publicly listed company. But I think we're getting to realistic valuations now. We were using metrics to base the industry on things like funded capacity and things that were irrelevant metrics that really didn't mean anything. So I think we're getting to a much more level playing field now. And there has been a bit of a crisis selling mode. And I think this is really the shakeout that we needed. And I think the good companies are going to survive. We've seen a few failures, and there's more that are close. It has been devastating for investors. I'm one as well. But I also think there's a lot of runway ahead, especially as we go to Cannabis 2.0, as we're calling it, with the new products, which are widely available in the illegal market. But currently, as licensed producers, we can't sell them. Hopefully, we can get them on the shelves by January, and that really should help us to compete on a more level playing field with the illegal market.
That's great. Just to give people a little bit of context, what Cannabis 2.0 is a term that's being thrown around. For those that don't know, when we legalized cannabis in Canada for both medical and recreational purposes, up to today, we only really allow for dried flower and oil products to be made available in some different forms. And Cannabis 2.0 is the government of Canada saying that we're going to actually allow edibles and topicals and vapes and a variety of different forms of cannabis that the non-medical market has needed for quite some time, as well as facilitating further the medical program. So just wanted to give people context a little bit. Michael, we'll come to you, but I want to chat with Barinder first from a publicly listed company perspective, then come to you to give the comments.
Sure. Thanks for the question, Antonio. I think from Supreme perspective, we are very optimistic because, as Jeanette mentioned, we see this as correcting itself. We see players falling off. We see genuine companies that are in it for the right businesses riding this out and being successful at the end. No one brand right now has cornered the market, either in Canada or internationally, so there's plenty of opportunity there. And I think for the last little while, you heard companies go around the world and talk about grow metrics, but not talking about what they're producing, what they're talking about brands. And I think that's going to differentiate a lot, and those are the ones that will go on to be successful. Now, you think of the Canadian market, a lot gets talked about on the financial side, but there are a lot of good operators that are doing a very good product, very good job. But industry itself has shot itself in the foot and got a black eye. There are some operators that have done very shady things, and they've been punished for that. And unfortunately, the entire industry has taken a hit for that. But I think you'll see this correct over time, and I think you'll see the genuine good operators succeed.
Yeah, I think to Jeanette's point, we're going to see a stratification of players in the space where some of the better players will stick around, but it won't be for everyone. But yeah, I think early days in Canada, to be poignant in terms of the question, I feel like it was a lot about production capacity, and even the biggest players in the world are guilty of this, just production capacity would not necessarily think about where all that product's being moved. So I think one of the big lessons as we're continuing to develop the global infrastructure of the space is really twofold. One, in production capacity is an important KPI to be thinking about, but also what's my target addressable market and how can I optimize for that and how can I grow intelligently. And I think the other piece that we definitely learned in Canada is that you can't be the best at everything. And vertical integration as a strategy in a long-term industry is not something that we typically see. So how can you partner with best-in-class, whether it's manufacturing partners or ancillary businesses or supply chain partners to build a true sustainable business?
I also think it's worth mentioning, Deepak, and to Antonio's point, that Canadian companies didn't have access to capital when this industry started. So you had a lot of companies, that were going public that had zero revenue. And when the bell rang and, the numbers weren't where they were supposed to be, that's why you started to see this decline.
Can I just ask from that perspective, and we'll put Canaccord on the spot when they come on stage to talk, and Alex is phenomenal at that. But do you think part of this is because some of these investment banks that got in early didn't do a lot of due diligence on sort of companies and were literally handing out cash? Joel, would love to hear your perspective.
In reality, there were a lot of lessons learned. Canada being the first mover, and a lot of when you build a 1 million square foot cultivation facility, or when you build an extraction facility that's built to do a ton a week, there's going to be a lot of lessons learned, and now I think it's back to fundamentals, right? And when we talk about some of the bad operators, I think that's just ultimately it's a patient who suffers, and that I'm happy to see some of them move on and move out of the market and leave it to the professional operators. But there have been some very valuable lessons learned, and I certainly think there could be some more, unfortunately, because it's a very complex market. I mean, it's a very complex plant with a lot of unique pieces to it.
Yeah. Without a lot of time left, I want each of you to comment on, I don't think we've actually answered the question. Do you think Canada is leading, is lagging on the cannabis industry? Where do you think we are? And maybe I'll start from you, Michael, and go down. Do you think we're leading, we're lagging, or do you think we will lag if we're not going to make some changes?
Yeah, I think we're leading, or Canadians are leading right now from a production perspective, and we're at an interesting sort of pivotal point as Canada expands from only a handful of SKUs to dozens of SKUs to see if they could be the global leader for cannabis products.
Jeanette?
I think Canada can be the leader and remain there. One of the nice things to know is we have legalized and the sky has not fallen. We've had no increase in crime and issues like that, and our governments are collecting money. But I think one of our biggest challenges in Canada is really having responsible retail or patient delivery, which I think is one of the things we really need to work with our regulators to really fix up.
Leading or lagging? Leading or lagging?
Leading.
Leading. Okay, Barinder.
Yeah, I'd say leading in the sense that there's not a regulator in the world when they think about bringing their policy that they always look to Canada. Nowhere in the world are they cultivating at the scale under a regulated environment than Canada is. Companies around the world, there's no doubt that the US and Europe definitely can raise more capital, but when it comes to cultivating at scale under a regulated environment, it will be Canadian expertise that will be leading. So in that sense, I think we'll continue to lead.
Joel?
I think definitely we were leading. It's a mild margin now. And I think the key for the Canadian companies is, as Miriam was saying earlier, is come into these European markets and find the right partners. Because there's an expertise here in the pharma world, and there's a learned expertise in commercial production of cannabis. And those two together would be very powerful. So as a Canadian, I certainly hope we charge through and pick the right partners and continue to grow.
Yeah, I agree with Joel. I mean, I think Canada's in a very unique position. I do think they are leading the charge, but that gap is shrinking. So yeah, leading.
Yeah, I just want to add my own perspective as well. I think that, from a patient access perspective, we're certainly lagging. We have done very little actually for medical cannabis patients post-legalization. We saw a lot of companies, and not putting anybody on the spot, but we saw a lot of companies that would say they would be patients first, and unfortunately we see patients in Canada from a medical cannabis perspective really suffering post-legalization, and it's not only the government that's at fault or business at fault. I think taxation in Canada needs to be removed from medical cannabis, and we need to do more from a medical cannabis perspective. I generally think we're leading, but we will go to lagging very quickly unless we resolve some government issues. So with that, thank you very much to our panelists. Really appreciate having you guys on stage.
Thank you.